Welcome back to another episode of CRNA School Prep Academy. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell, and thank you so much for joining me this week. So today we're going to cover what are some questions that you should be asking the interview panel after your interview. So as you may know, CSPA has two expert contributors now, Richard Wilson and Don Abushan, who has a program director experience. Richard has assistant program experience, both well over 10 years. And so they come to CSPA with a lot of insight over the last decade on guiding students to get into their programs and how to make them competitive candidates. So I recently posed this question because I get asked this a lot, and today I'm going to share with some insight from them on what they like to get from students during the CRNA school interview as far as questions at the end. Now, I also want to start this off with saying that you should have a question for the interview panel. I have heard program faculty say that, they get to the very end of the interview, it might have been a really good interview, and then they ask their student who are the interviewee if they have any questions for them, and they say no. And it kind of just leaves them feeling like, come on, I want you to have something to ask me. So you should have at least one question. Now, you don't want to have a laundry list. I would encourage you to pick one or two questions, maybe a third question, but for the most part, I think two is probably where I think most students should call it quits, because again, they usually are on a time requirement to interview you, and they just don't have time to answer 5 or 6 or 10 questions. You also want to be very, very careful that you're not asking questions that you can easily find out through visiting their website. This is a big red flag for a lot of programs that just shows that you didn't do your due diligence and really thoroughly read through their program and what their program's all about. There are also a lot of schools who will kind of do what I call kind of a meet and greet prior to the interview, where you mix and mingle with students, and the program faculty actually introduce the program and hit a lot of questions that students typically have about their program. So this tends to make it kind of tricky, because then you may have had a question prepared, but if they went over that during that time, you clearly don't want to be asking that question, because then it just shows that you didn't listen, right? And also sometimes programs do that on purpose to cut down on how many questions students have for them, because like I said, they typically maybe have 1 or 2 questions tops that you can ask them during the time frame that they have to interview. So either way, I asked for guidance from both Richard and Don to see what they had to say about students asking questions at the end of the interview. So some of the questions that were recommended are turnover rate for faculty, which I found very interesting. I personally would never have thought to ask that question. But the reason why I think this question is really good is because if they have had a high turnover rate for faculty, and I hate to say this, but a lot of programs do, it could indicate some instability or potentially, how can I say this? If they have all this new faculty, it could make your time as a student even a little more challenging, is probably a good way to put it, because they're going to have some kinks to work out. And I myself, when I was in school, we had a program director retire. We had a new assistant director, and that also taught class. And I remember she came in with nothing. Like, she didn't have notes. She didn't have anything to go by, because the previous professor would just really talk off the cuff and didn't really necessarily have a lot of prepared notes. And so this newer person kind of struggled during the time that we came into her course. And I know she worked so hard and she did a great job, but was it a little intermittently kind of challenging? Yeah, it was. So it made for a transition that kind of reflected a little more challenge on us, the student body. So while at the end of the day, we all did great, we all went on to become CRNAs, it was fine. It is something to kind of consider and think about if they have a high turnover rate in faculty, and that could signal potential and some instability. And why is that? And that's what, essentially was said, that can indicate stability of a program. If they have had long-standing faculty members, that's a really good indication that the program is very stable. Like I said, the program that I went to, the director retired after, I don't know how many years, probably well over 15, 20 years. It was a very long time. And even now, for the most part, that program over the last 40 years has only been run by 2 people, which is amazing. so I think that's a good thing, right? So also suggested, what does your faculty enjoy most about the program? Which I think is really interesting. It kind of lets them give their own personal opinion, which I think is a great question to ask because it's not something, again, that you can find on their website. So again, what do they enjoy the most about their program, which will allow you to find out something maybe a little more unique that maybe only insiders would know about, for example. Another question, support or encouragement. Do they support or encourage students to attend professional events through the AANA, state associations, those types of things? I think that's really key too, because some schools are really, really proactive with it and really make sure they get their students involved. And other programs, it's optional, it's there, but essentially it's a little more on the students to take initiative to do it versus the programs really saying you need to go do this kind of thing. So it just would be, based on your own values, based on what you want out of your education. I think that's a great question to ask. Another question is, what are the 2 most common reasons for attrition in your program? I think that's really awesome as well, because it allows them to say, instead of saying, can you explain your attrition rate? You could say, what are the 2 most common reasons for your attrition rate? And yes, you guys, some schools have a significantly high attrition rate. Some schools that I know of have 35%. That's very, very high. And some schools historically have a low attrition rate, like maybe less than 10%. And then all of a sudden 1 year, boom, they have, 30%. So what happened, right? It leaves you wondering. Now, it's not always a bad thing on the school, so don't read into it. Don't not apply to a school just because they have a high attrition rate. There could be a very good reason for that. I know, like with the year that, 2020 was quite a year, right? That year's programs had almost all programs across the board had a little bit higher attrition rate. But is it at the fault of the programs? No. Granted, there was a lot of things going on, like transitioning to virtual, and sure, that was an added challenge and stressor on the student body, but it could have also been, the students having personal problems as well with everything going on that year. So it's not always a negative reflection on the program, but it could indicate such. So it's kind of important to kind of say, well, what are the 2 most common reasons that you feel like your attrition rate is 30% or whatever it is, 20%? Hey, future CRNA, now that I have you thinking about your CRNA school interview, I want to share a really amazing resource down below. I get asked a lot, how detailed of an answer are these schools looking for when it comes to clinical style questions? So in this free resource, I give you 10 real CRNA school interview questions and answer them for you so you know exactly what to expect as far as the type of answer they're looking for. I hope you grab the resource, and cheers to your future. Now back to the show and see what they say. Sometimes you literally have students, you guys, who get into CRNA school who decide that it's not for them. And that's no fault of the program. If anything, that's why you need to shadow a CRNA. Because I can't imagine getting into schooling and deciding, this is not what I want to do. So that does happen. Or I've had students who maybe have had like medical problems, right? Or who got diagnosed with cancer, or now have this major medical thing looming over them, or they decided to take a year off so they could start a family, or they did start a family and they decided to drop out. Whatever the reason is, it may not be anything wrong with the program. So I think it's an important question to ask. And I also want to share with you guys that down below you can grab another really amazing freebie. This one actually is different because it's CRNA school interview questions, but it's a study guide. So it's essentially answered interview questions, clinical interview questions, and it's a study guide that you guys can download. So make sure you grab that free resource down below. It's going to really, really help in your preparation for the interviews. But again, it's just clinical related questions. It's about 120 clinical questions that are all answered for you. So make sure you grab that freebie. Another question that is suggested for the interview panel, and Dr. Abushan says she likes creative questions, which I think is really cool, and ask about how the program encourages wellness for their students and residents. So yeah, I think this is a really great question because, well, first, wellness is really at the priority of what schools are realizing their students really need. I mean, like I said, 2020 was a hard year. I think it kind of unraveled a lot of weak points in CRNA schooling. And a lot of that stems from not allowing students to really focus on their own wellness, or not having students really prepared to focus on their wellness. Like I mentioned in other episodes, that's a really a vital step to making sure that you know what you need, and making sure you're still doing those things despite being really busy. But what are the schools doing to encourage wellness for their students? So I think it's kind of cool to know if they have, like, maybe they have some certain programs. Some programs even have free counselors that you can go to. So might be kind of a cool way to find that out. Do they have a wellness leader for each cohort that plans wellness events for the students' residents? I think that's really cool too, because that's not very common, I would say, to have a program have a focus on having a wellness leader within their program. I think that's a really great idea. And so it's a really cool thing to bring up and ask about. Because even if they don't, if you were to ask that question, then be like, oh, we don't, but that's a really great idea, right? And then then you maybe take the lead for that. You can come in their program and you can be the wellness leader. You see how you can kind of spin that a little bit? You can share that you're really passionate about that and how you would love to help that kind of program exist in their program. So I think that's a really great and unique question. Do the current students, residents learn about emotional intelligence? I think that's really cool too, because again, I went to school back in 2012, 2014, definitely was not taught. And, but I even know my kindergartners taught this. I mean, it should be part of a curriculum. And, I think it's really important. Like I said, I've mentioned this so many times, that mindset's a huge game changer for CRNA school. If you can go into CRNA school with the right mindset, you're going to be so much happier and do so much better. So emotional intelligence is part of mindset. And it's also will ease your time in the clinical realm, because if you have the understanding of what emotional intelligence is and how you can be more aware of maybe your own emotional intelligence, it'll allow you to communicate better. It'll allow you to read the room better. It'll allow you to show up better. It'll allow you to have better relationships, not just in clinical, but personal relationships too. So it's a really important factor in just overall satisfaction and success in your life. So I think it'd be really cool even if it was just one lecture on emotional intelligence. I think that's a really cool thing to ask if their program focuses on at all. Does the program provide a class or workshop on the business of anesthesia? This is really cool too. I know a lot of programs are now focusing on this a little bit, at least the programs I'm aware of. But again, this is something that when I was a student was not focused on really. Like, we did with some legal stuff, but that was really it. We didn't really go over a lot of the business of anesthesia. So I think that's a really cool question and something unique. Big shout out to Jeff Malter, who is a CRNA, who is a regional director of the ANA, and he teaches the business of anesthesia. He is phenomenal. His lecture will knock your socks off. It's so insightful. So I know he speaks at a lot of programs across the country on this topic. But again, I think understanding whether your school values that. And I think as a CRNA, I think you should have some understanding on your worth and what you bring to the table as a provider. Another question is, what type of pre-matriculation workshops or sessions are provided to the incoming cohort? For example, like a writing workshop or a support person seminar. So some programs actually kind of have, the best kind of comparison I can think of is like little SIBs, where you have like a big SIBs, little SIBs, where essentially you have like some upperclassmen who kind of take an underclassman under their wing. They kind of buddy system kind of thing. I think that's a really cool thing that some programs do for their students. And also having little mix and mingle sessions with upperclassmen for that. And also the writing workshop, because I've mentioned this before, that a lot of students come into CRNA school and maybe are rusty in that area because you don't have a lot of writing to do in your time as a nursing student. So I think having kind of a writing workshop, or just kind of setting the expectation of what they expect from you, is a really great way to start a program. We actually do this inside of our SRNA boot camp that we have, or I'm calling it SRNA, NAR boot camp, Nurse Anesthesia Resident boot camp. We actually do scholarly writing in that boot camp, because we do see this as a weakness in an area that schools are essentially letting us know, like, yeah, if students struggle, this is what they struggle with, and writing's one of them. So Definitely, if you're part of CRNA School Prep Academy, you have that to look forward to. And if you're not a CSPA student, you can become one and take advantage of our Nurse Anesthesia Resident Bootcamp. So these questions are all really great things to consider. Of course, if you have something else that you already had in mind, I'm not saying don't go with your question. That's perfectly fine. But I hope this kind of gave you guys some good insight on something different, something unique you can ask the programs. So that way, if you go to like a mix and mingle event prior to your interview and they answer all these questions, you at least now have a different ideas to pull from. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Cheers to your future. Be sure, again, to grab the interview study guide below so you can start preparing for your interview. All right, see you next week.